My father-in-law gave me this manly thing. And it's great for, well, moving things that I'm nowhere near strong enough to move. And it works just like a ratchet binder. So let's say you have this end on a stump or something, which is what I've used it for the most part so far. You would attach this to the stump and then it draws it in at a super slow speed, but it's just powerful as anything you could imagine. The lever goes on it like so. Well, as of lately, I've been using it to yank out a tree that got hung up in some other trees. It was a wind snap. I can probably cue some footage here. If you look way up high there, it's stuck, and so I yanked on it with this come-along thing to pull it away at the base. And thinking that after a half of an hour, maybe I would pull it far enough away from where it was standing to drop the whole thing over. But instead it just fell over more and got caught in a lower crotch. And that's what you can see here in this second footage. And looking at this scene, you can see that the tree's a little bit shorter, and that's because I had pulled the tree somewhat horizontal off the ground. It was under so much tension. And then what I would do is cut a couple feet at a time off with the chainsaw, and then when I set the tree back down, the base would be, well, the whole tree would be shorter, and I was hoping that as the tree stood more and more upright, that it would just fall out of the crotch and fall over. But it got dark and I had to stop, and so it's an ongoing mission. But back to the point here. On this end, I would anchor it with a heavy-duty strap like this to a stationary tree, and then this pulley end would be attached to a chain, and that's the hard part of the process. Not cranking on this, but the chain. So with the come-along came this gift from my father-in-law. But it was filled with chain. And chain is heavy. So moving this was like moving a body, and it's already broken, so it never worked, and it hurt my back, and so I ended up building this. The idea here is that it's easier to move chain half at a time, since there are two of them. But the boxes are stackable. The lid to this little box is just plywood. This is a little bit fancy. I used a dovetail bit for the router, and that gives it an undercut that usually your finger can grab easily. And it works for both boxes. Now, as for the construction, really easy. Chain is kind of like a liquid load. So your box doesn't have to be super strong structurally in any one spot. It just has to be, in general, pretty well put together, if that makes any sense. It's, like I said, it's like a liquid load. And the load can shift if you're moving it around in, say, the back of a quad. But while it's at rest, there's very little outward force that the chain is putting on the box unless the load shifts too quickly. For the most part, it's just pressing straight down across a wide area, which is this bottom. And this bottom can't fall through because it's nailed all the way around, and there's so many nails that help to spread that force to the sides that it's not likely to separate very easily. The feet stick through only 1 inch, and they're slightly tapered on the outside edges with a belt sander to get it to kind of wedge tight into the next box. Correspondingly, this is 1 inch down from the top of the plywood. Now, if you look at the joinery close up, note these overlaps. Their position is deliberate because when the rope handle is used, now these sides want to squeeze in this way. And in order to stop that, the plywood stops short of this other plywood so that this plywood can't squeeze in because it's locked in its position. Similarly, this brace does the same thing, but it's really not being called into action for that sort of force. The handle. I found that it was annoying if you just used PVC because it would shift along the rope. So what I did was cut a little plug out, and that plug, it still allows it to move, but it doesn't move easily. It kind of finds its perfectly square spot by doing this, and then it just stays there. In order to get the plug to work correctly, well, I used a disc sander, and I set the base of the disc sander to about 2 degrees, and then fine-tuned the circle that way so that it's shaped somewhat like a cork that wedges itself in and then stops. One cool thing about this design is it would look like these knots would be pretty much impossible, but they're not. Look, when you pick the handle up, you can slide it all the way in and get a whole bunch of excess out to tie your knot right near the end, and then it will tighten up easily. They kind of resemble bee boxes to me. This is certainly an overkill for something to keep your chain in. But I figured I'm going to have it around here forever. So you might as well store it in something that works well, and I can throw it in the back of the quad or the back of a pickup truck really easily without killing myself. So I hope you got a kick out of this. It's kind of neat to see stuff that other people make, especially weird solutions to non-problems. Well, let's call it a mild problem. I do have a sore back. A few more things I'd like to mention. These boxes are 8 inches tall and they have inside dimensions of 10 inches. Also note that I have this one at a 45-degree angle relative to this one, and you might not think this is important, but when you're building something just in general, you want to keep your options open. So do this. It's a small thing that you can improve. On all of the feet, put a little tiny chamfer right there on the inside edge. Just make it the thickness of the plywood, and then these will snap down over the other at a 45-degree angle. Does this matter much? No, of course not, but it's easy to do, so why not do it? One last thing. In spite of the fact that I moved these back and forth a million times like an imbecile in this video, for demonstration, these really were designed with a logistical approach in mind. So if this is where your boxes are and you need to move them to a new location, it really should only be 2 steps. That's the central premise, instead of having to do something like this, which would be more lifting. Okay, see you next time.